we've got a camera here that's designed for photojournalists, sports photographers, action photographers, wildlife, wedding photographers, military, law enforcement, anyone who makes a living with a camera, who needs a high-speed burst rate, who needs the most rock-solid camera that we make, who needs a highly weatherproof camera, durable. This is the camera for them. What we've done here is we've taken a brand new Nikon FX format 16.2 megapixel CMOS sensor. And what that sensor does, is it gives a beautiful balance of high image quality and low system noise. And speaking of noise, the camera has an ISO range from ISO 50 all the way up to 204,800. Its native ISO is 100 to 12,800. So for those shooting under ideal conditions, less than ideal conditions, and really, really terrible conditions, this is a camera that can handle that light. And you know, we know from experience of our D3 and D3S shooters that a good majority of our photographers make their living shooting under low light conditions. So D4 is well prepared for that. We've got XP3 image processing and a brand new 91,000 pixel RGB sensor. And that's really the heart of the system. And what that sensor does is it is responsible for auto exposure, it's responsible for auto white balance, ITTL flash, and focus tracking via the subject's color. So imagine where the D3S was really, really excellent, was in subject tracking. And what that made that camera so wonderful was that it had a 1005 pixel RGB sensor. You would track on the 1005. Well, now we've got 91,000 RGB pixels for the camera to subject track off of. That's astounding to me and a tremendous improvement. And then we added an extra bonus. When you're working in 3D dynamic autofocus or auto area autofocus, in the background, while you're working through the viewfinder, the camera can also recognize faces, just like, you know, a point and shoot camera can do that, or when you're working in live view with face priority. So you don't see that happening in the viewfinder, but the camera is doing it through the optical viewfinder. So if you're photographing someone running or someone moving or gesturing, the camera will find their faces and focus on that as well too. So really big autofocus enhancements. And then you add to that all new functionality, such as the ability to work with autofocus down to f8. It's the first Nikon camera in a DSLR line that can do that. So those of you who use a 200 to 400, the 500 f4 or the 600 f4 with our teleconverter, especially the 2x converter, where your aperture is now going to be f8, you're going to have autofocus performance where you've never had that before. The camera has been slightly redesigned over D3S, minor enhancements that are really, really important to a working pro who's holding a camera in their hands all day long. Just the sloping of the on-off switch here is really much more comfortable. It's down 35 degrees. And then the angle of the command dial out front is sloped slightly up so that it's really natural for your finger to migrate there. When you want to start and stop your video, you've got the red start and stop button right near the shutter where it's very, very convenient. Okay, so when you turn to the side and the back of the camera, we've got a couple of new features here. We've got a couple of these focus selectors or joystick controls here, because we know that photographers make pictures not just horizontally, but vertically as well. So the camera has got redundant controls, so when you're in horizontal and the vertical orientation, they're really easy to find and grab onto. Now, remember I mentioned that great high ISO range before? Well, if you're shooting at that kind of high ISO range, we've got to assume that you're shooting in super, super low light. Well, one cool thing, this is one of those wow factor things you get on D4, is that for the first time on our cameras, you got buttons on the back, your main controls here, that are rear illuminated in low light. So a really cool feature, you know, that I've often thought about that. I use remote controls and I always want them illuminated. My cell phone's got the buttons illuminated. So why not controls on the camera? And that's what they've done. Since D3 was introduced in 2007, the market has completely changed. In fact, news went from being delivered on your doorstep, literally, to online. And we've also noticed that a lot of content these days is being asked for is HD video. So D4 is not only equipped to give you really fantastic quality stills at up to 10 frames per second at full resolution, but the video features in this camera I think are really top notch. So let's start off with the video features. We've got 1080p at 30 frames, 25 frames, or 24 frames per second. You've got 720p at 60 frames or 50 frames per second. So you can do some really smooth transitions when subjects are moving really fast. Slow it down and make slow motion out of it. Really, really cool. Not only can you shoot 1080p at the FX format, full frame of the camera, you can also go to the DX format. So you can use our DX Nikkor lenses, or using a telephoto, get a little bit extra reach, 1.5x to be exact, and get full 1080p. And then we've added this unique 2.7x crop mode. And what that does, it really is like almost like a one-to-one relationship for the pixels and gives you no line skipping at 2.7x. So imagine putting a 500mm lens with a converter, getting 1,000 millimeters, you go to 2.7x, you're up at 2,700 millimeters just about. If my math is correct, which it usually isn't, but that's kind of cool. So, you know, if you need that kind of reach, really, really neat. A stereo input jack, you can add a stereo mic, including our neat little ME1 stereo microphone, but we've also added a headphone jack, so you can actually monitor the sound in isolation and really, really adjust the levels really precisely. On the side, we've also got a LAN connector and an HDMI port. We've also got this new port for a brand new WT5A, a really small wireless transmitter. And of course, you got USB. Now, speaking of HDMI, since I was on the video section of the camera, what's really neat about D4 is that through HDMI, you can connect an HDMI cord to an external recorder and stream uncompressed video 1080 right out of the camera. A really, really big advantage for those who want high resolution. Simultaneous live view, which allows you to go HDMI from the camera into an external monitor while still being able to preview and look at the live view screen on your camera. So if you're on a rig or a tripod and you've got a camera operator using D4 for video, and you've got maybe a focus pole looking at a monitor, you can both look at the LCD image simultaneously. We have dual slots like we did in D3 series cameras, but now we have a CF card slot and we have what's called an XQD card slot. Now, we realize that the data required from video at 30p can be quite heavy. And also, this is a camera that we talked about that had 10 frame per second burst rate. And we know that very, very quickly you can shoot a lot of images, maybe clog the buffer. With XQD cards, first of all, the read-write speeds are really, really fast, and the transfer speeds can be up to 1 gigabit per second. So that's also importantly fast. So with XQD in the camera, you can shoot up to 200 shots at JPEG medium setting, and about 150 or so at the JPEG fine large setting. So a really big improvement in how it can handle all that data coming through the camera. And of course, through video, we now have the ability to shoot up to 29 minutes and 59 seconds, whether you're shooting in any of the modes, FX, DX, or 2.7x crop. So this new generation of card, this high capacity, high speed card, is becoming hugely important in D4. When your video is on, and you've got all the requisite shooting information, shutter speed, aperture, all that data that's on screen that's really important to how you make the picture. Well, when you're capturing video through a live view feed, you don't really want that information. So through custom settings on the HDMI and the shooting menu, you can turn that off and you won't see any of that information whatsoever as the video comes out of the camera. And another really cool feature, you can customize on the front of the camera the depth of field preview and the function button. Through the movie settings in the custom setting menu, you can customize it so you get power aperture control with no sound as you're adjusting the aperture and a stepless aperture control. So, you know, we've beefed up the camera for the video. We've given photographers improvements in resolution, autofocus performance, metering performance. The ergonomics of the camera are just really, really, really sweet. I know the reaction here at CES has been nothing short of stellar. Everyone who puts the camera in their hand says the same thing. It feels really light. And so a testament, I guess, to our designers and engineers is I think they did a yeoman's job in giving Nikon photographers the next great pro tool out there. So for Nikon at CES, Lindsay Silverman and the fabulous D4.